It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, a signature on a page that would send shockwaves through royal corridors, echoing far beyond the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace. A decision so absolute, so meticulously calculated, that it effectively drew a line in the sand, a line that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle could no longer cross. The news broke in whispers at first. Palace aides, accustomed to discreet communications, spoke of an unprecedented royal decree, words that, for insiders, were enough to signal seismic change. But what exactly did it mean? The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, once the glittering stars of a modern monarchy narrative, were about to find their standing within the royal family effectively obliterated. But before we continue, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Ask yourself this: what happens when centuries of lineage, tradition, and public expectation collide with the personal choices of two individuals? What happens when the crown, the symbol of continuity and authority, acts with a decisiveness that few have seen in modern times? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the reality that Harry and Meghan now face. And it's a reality many assumed would never arrive. For weeks, rumors had swirled. Speculation ran rampant across social media and in international newsrooms. Every move by the Sussexes was dissected, every statement scrutinized, every photo examined for subtle cues of tension or defiance. And yet, no one could have anticipated the finality of the action that King Charles III took. This was not about withdrawing a title temporarily. It was not about sidelining the couple for a few ceremonial occasions. It was a move that struck at the very foundation of their royal identity. All titles revoked, heraldry erased, lineage rights stripped. It is a legal, historical, and symbolic hammer blow, one that will define the Sussexes' place, or lack thereof, within the monarchy for the foreseeable future. Consider the implications. Being a duke or duchess in the United Kingdom is not simply a matter of prestige or public recognition. It is a status interwoven with centuries of history, duties, and responsibilities. It comes with privileges, yes, but also with recognition in the royal ledger, in state records, in the very architecture of national symbolism. Harry and Meghan's removal from this ledger is more than a bureaucratic correction. It is an erasure. The coat of arms that once represented their house, now gone. Their names excised from official documents. Their position in the line of succession, while technically unchanged in order, now carries a shadow of public and familial disapproval that cannot be undone. To the casual observer, it may seem like a formality. To those who study the monarchy, the message is unequivocal. The crown has drawn its final boundary. And yet, the story is not just about erasure. It is about timing, context, and the subtle psychology of power. The Sussexes' past actions, their outspoken media appearances, their interviews and public statements, all of these contributed to the narrative that led to this unprecedented decision. The palace, traditionally cautious and deliberate, does not act without forethought. The language in the royal decree was carefully measured, formal, devoid of unnecessary flourish, yet carrying the weight of centuries of constitutional authority. Each word was chosen to convey firmness without melodrama. Yet within its simplicity lay a power that no press conference or public statement could match. In other words, while the media frenzy fixates on images and interviews, the quiet authority of the king's signature is what ultimately reshapes the narrative. We should pause and ask, how did it come to this? The Sussexes' journey has been well documented. From Harry's early life under the shadow of his mother's tragic death to the public and sometimes painful scrutiny he endured as a royal, to Meghan's rise as an American actress who suddenly became entwined in the British royal tapestry, the pieces of their story are familiar. But what is often overlooked in public discourse is the structural tension within the monarchy itself, the collision of personal autonomy with the weight of inherited duty. Harry and Meghan were not merely individuals making personal choices. They were actors in a centuries-old institution that has always demanded conformity, even at the cost of personal happiness. Their decision to step back, to seek financial independence, and to speak openly about personal grievances was not merely a personal rebellion. It was, in the eyes of the crown, a challenge to the very legitimacy of tradition. There is another layer here, one that is often lost in the sensational headlines, the emotional calculus. Think about King Charles, a monarch who has spent decades preparing for this role. The decisions he makes are not solely about public perception. They are about legacy, stability, and the perception of the monarchy in a world that increasingly demands transparency, yet clings to tradition. To sign this decree was to make a statement about boundaries, responsibility, and authority. It was a signal to other family members, to the public, and to institutions both domestic and international. Personal choices, however noble or well-intentioned, do not override the expectations of the crown. And yet, there is irony in this narrative. Here are two individuals who once seemed untouchable, whose every move was amplified across continents, whose names drew attention in boardrooms, red carpets, and tabloids alike. And now, in the span of a single royal order, their institutional identity has been diminished. They remain Harry and Meghan, of course, but the weight that accompanies their titles, weight they may have once considered burdensome, is gone. Public fascination may persist, but the formal recognition, the tangible acknowledgement of their standing, has been retracted. And in that retraction lies a subtle but profound shift. The monarchy has reasserted itself, not with words or statements, but with action that leaves little room for debate. The immediate reaction, predictably, has been mixed. Supporters of the Sussexes view this as an unforgiving, even cruel act, proof of a rigid institution unwilling to adapt. Critics see it as overdue, a restoration of proper boundaries and the dignity of the royal family. Yet, even among royal commentators, historians, and insiders, there is a shared understanding that what happened here is almost unprecedented in its clarity and permanence. There have been disputes over titles before. There have been scandals and separations. But to remove individuals from the lineage, to strip them of heraldry, to erase them symbolically and administratively, is a measure rarely exercised in modern times, and never without long-lasting consequences. For those watching closely, there is also the question of timing. Why now? Why in this particular moment? The palace has been deliberate in its communications, and leaks have been scarce. Yet it is clear that the decision was not made impulsively. A series of events, private interviews, public criticisms, financial controversies, and media appearances culminated in what can only be described as a tipping point. Each action, each public statement by the Sussexes may have added weight to the calculation, yet the final move was executed with precision. The king's signature was not just a formality. It was a decisive moment, a crystallization of months, if not years, of consideration and strategy. And the stakes extend beyond the individual. This is about public perception, institutional trust, and historical precedent. Future generations will look back at this moment, just as we now examine earlier royal crises, and see it as a defining episode in the evolution of the monarchy. What does it mean for the relationship between private desire and public duty? How far can the crown go to enforce conformity, and at what cost? These are the questions that linger in the background, and they are not easily answered. They demand reflection, yet they demand attention, because the consequences of this act ripple far beyond the Sussexes themselves. By now, you might be asking, what happens to Harry and Meghan? How do you even measure the impact of such a sweeping decree? And what does this mean for their children, their public presence, or any future claims to influence within the royal sphere? These questions are not merely speculative. They are pressing, immediate, and highly consequential. Because when the crown acts in this way, it sends a signal not only to the individuals directly involved, but to the world observing them. Every move, every word, every subtle gesture will now be viewed through the lens of this decree, and nothing can undo the first impression left by such a decisive action. But perhaps the most compelling question of all is the one that cannot yet be answered. How will the Sussexes respond, both publicly and privately? Will they accept this as a fait accompli, recalibrating their ambitions and their narrative to fit the new reality? Or will there be further actions, statements, or legal challenges that could reopen the debate, reignite the media frenzy, and draw them back into the very institution they sought to step away from? At this moment, the palace remains tight-lipped, the public watches with anticipation, and insiders speak only in cautious hints. It is a scene charged with tension, where every subtle movement could signal the next chapter in a saga that seems far from concluded. And as we prepare to delve deeper into this story, there is one detail that must not be overlooked: the sheer finality of this act. Titles, heraldry, lineage rights, these are not superficial symbols. They are the currency of legitimacy, recognition, and identity within a royal framework. To strip them away is not just to diminish public standing. It is to challenge the very narrative the Sussexes have built around themselves for years. It is a calculated move, one that asserts authority, signals consequence, and frames the next chapter of the monarchy's story in stark, unambiguous terms. And yet, even with such clarity, the aftermath is unpredictable. Because once power is exercised, once boundaries are drawn, the reactions, alliances, and repercussions can unfold in ways no one fully anticipates. They say a signature can change history. Rarely does one feel it so acutely as when the pen is wielded by a monarch. In this case, that pen was King Charles III's, and the document it inked would alter the lives of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in ways no interview, no media statement, no public display of emotion could ever undo. The royal decree, official, deliberate, and unambiguous, revoked their titles, stripped them of heraldry, and removed them from the official line of royal lineage documents. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't a symbolic gesture or a warning shot. It was final. Ask yourself, how often do we see a modern monarch act with such decisiveness? The palace is accustomed to optics, to careful phrasing, to slow maneuvering behind closed doors. A dispute over a title might have been quietly mediated in the past. Yet this was a calculated, historical act that conveyed one thing with perfect clarity. Boundaries had been crossed, and the crown would not tolerate it. The immediate impact was both practical and psychological. Titles, while ceremonious, carry weight. They dictate protocol, influence perception, and confer a certain legitimacy that resonates in public life and within the monarchy itself. For Harry and Meghan, the loss of Duke and Duchess of Sussex was not merely a loss of nomenclature. It was a public declaration: your privileges, your formal place, your symbolic identity within the royal institution, all of it is revoked. And the consequences were immediate. Palace staff were quietly instructed to update internal registers, remove heraldic symbols from official documents, and enforce the decree across every formal channel where the Sussexes had previously held recognition. Even charitable organizations affiliated with the titles received notice. Use of the Sussex name in official contexts was no longer sanctioned. Consider the psychological dimension. This was more than bureaucracy. The decree sent a message, clear and direct. The monarchy would not bend, it would not negotiate, and it would not be reshaped by individual choices. For the Sussexes, the symbolism was unavoidable. Titles are intertwined with identity. They are an extension of one's place in history, a badge recognized by millions. Removing them is akin to erasing a chapter of personal narrative from the storybook of monarchy itself. Every photograph of public appearances, every official communication, every past ceremony where they were identified as Duke and Duchess became, in retrospect, a relic of a status no longer recognized. And yet, even within this carefully constructed action, there was a human element. King Charles, like any monarch, is bound by history, tradition, and the weight of expectation. But he is also a father, and the Sussexes are his children. The decision to sign the decree was not made lightly. Behind closed doors, reports indicate, there were weeks of deliberation, consultation with senior advisors, and a review of precedents spanning centuries. Legal and ceremonial experts outlined every possible consequence, ensuring that the decree would be airtight, undeniable, and irreversible in the ways that mattered most. At the same time, the emotional calculus was complicated. By removing titles and heraldry, the king risked public backlash. The Sussexes have millions of supporters worldwide, many of whom see their struggles as emblematic of modern pressures, of a monarchy out of touch with contemporary values. There were whispers in media circles. Could such a decisive act be perceived as punitive, vindictive, even cruel? Yet the palace appears to have decided that clarity outweighed optics. In matters of legacy and institutional authority, hesitation could be more damaging than controversy. One of the most striking aspects of the decree is the language itself. There is no hyperbole, no sensationalist phrasing, no personal commentary. The document is formal, legalistic, and precise. It outlines the revocation of titles, the removal of heraldic symbols, and the excision from official lineage records. Every clause is deliberate, measured, and devoid of embellishment. And yet, in that very restraint lies the emotional impact. The absence of flourish makes the consequences hit harder because there is no cushion, no softening, no ambiguity to absorb the blow. The Sussexes' royal identity was effectively erased, and the silence of the decree amplified the effect.